Welcome to this explainer. You know, when we think of contracts today, we usually picture dense piles of paperwork, digital signatures, maybe some lawyers sitting around a boardroom. But thousands of years ago, sealing a binding agreement, especially one between a people and the divine, involved physical monuments, visceral rituals, and awe-inspiring displays of power. Today, we're going to unpack the anatomy of one of the most famous, multi-sensory ancient contracts in history.
So let's jump right into our source material for today, the exact text of Exodus 24. This specific English Standard Version translation outlines a very procedural event. Honestly, it's not just a mystical story. It reads like a step-by-step legal ratification process. We're going to break down exactly how this ancient agreement was locked in.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll be looking at 1. The verbal agreement, 2. Building the 12 pillars, 3. The blood of the covenant, 4. The sapphire pavement, and 5. Into the devouring fire.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the verbal agreement, establishing the terms.
According to the text, Moses comes down the mountain and lays out the rules. But notice the immediate unified response from the people. They didn't go off and deliberate in committees. They answered collectively with one voice. They literally just said, "All the words that the Lord has spoken, we will do." It's a unanimous, total verbal handshake.
But as any good lawyer will tell you, a verbal agreement just doesn't cut it for a contract of this magnitude. So, following their verbal commitment, Moses immediately gets to work writing all the words down. He's transitioning this agreement from a spoken promise to a hard-written record, making absolutely sure there's no ambiguity about what they just agreed to.
Moving on to Section 2, building the 12 pillars, the physical anchors.
Bright and early the very next morning, Moses gets back to work. He builds an altar at the foot of the mountain, and right alongside it, he sets up exactly 12 pillars. This is the moment where these abstract laws become permanently grounded in the physical world.
And here is the crucial point for our focus today. Those aren't just random stones. They directly correspond to the 12 tribes of Israel. The altar represents the divine party, and these massive stone monuments represent the people. This is literally Israel's 12 pillars of law. They stand there as physical, grounded witnesses to the terms they just accepted. Imagine standing before those massive stones. You see the tribes, and you see the binding nature of the agreement made totally permanent right there in the landscape.
Which brings us to Section 3, the blood of the covenant, the visceral ritual.
With Israel's 12 pillars of law built, the ratification process escalates into a highly visceral sensory ritual. Moses sends young men to sacrifice oxen, and he turns this dense ancient practice into a clear, methodical process. First, he takes half of the blood from these sacrifices and puts it in basins. The other half, he throws it directly against the altar. Right after this, he takes that newly written book of the covenant and reads it out loud for everyone to hear.
After hearing the formal reading of the document, the people echo their promise from earlier, but this time they add a really vital phrase. They say, "All that the Lord has spoken we will do, and we will be obedient." They are absolutely doubling down. The contract has been read in full, the altar is marked, and their commitment is completely locked in.
And then we get this shocking, dramatic culmination of the ritual. Moses takes those basins containing the remaining half of the blood and quite literally throws it directly onto the people. As he does this, he declares, "Behold the blood of the covenant." It is incredibly visceral. The exact same blood that marked the altar representing God now marks the people. The two parties are visually, physically bound together by this intense act.
Let's take a breath and look at Section 4, the sapphire pavement, vision of the divine.
So after the blood is thrown and the covenant is sealed on the ground, a specific roster of VIPs, Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and 70 of the elders, are invited up the mountain. Earlier in the text, God had actually warned them to keep their distance. But what happens now is extraordinary. The text notes that they actually safely beheld the God of Israel. God didn't lay his hand on them. It wasn't a terrifying encounter. Instead, they literally sat, beheld God, and ate and drank together.
And how do they even begin to describe this unimaginable experience? Well, the text gives us this stunning visual. It says under his feet was a pavement of sapphire stone as clear as the heavens themselves. Notice how the earthly dirt and the splashing blood at the foot of the mountain contrast so sharply with this pristine, brilliant sapphire pavement in the divine presence.
The contract has essentially granted them access to something unimaginably beautiful.
Finally, we reach Section 5, Into the Devouring Fire, the final document.
The Lord tells Moses to come up the mountain and wait, promising to give him the actual stone tablets containing the law and the commandment. So Moses gets up with his assistant Joshua to head into the mountain of God, leaving Aaron and Hur behind in the camp to settle any disputes while he is gone.
As Moses heads up, this massive cloud completely swallows the mountain. The glory of the Lord dwells on Mount Sinai, and the text tells us this cloud covers it for 6 full days. Just imagine being one of the Israelites down below, or even Moses himself, waiting in this heavy, electric anticipation as the mountain is blanketed for almost a week.
The tension builds and builds until the 7th day. It's on the 7th day that God finally calls out to Moses right from the very middle of the cloud.
And to the Israelites watching from the camp, this divine presence wasn't just a gentle mist or a dark storm cloud. The text explicitly says it appeared as a devouring fire on the top of the mountain. It's an overwhelmingly powerful, frankly terrifying visual of the entity they've just legally bound themselves to.
Yet Moses boldly enters that cloud, walking right into the fiery presence. He stays up there on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights to receive the final stone-carved documentation of this world-changing covenant.
Seeing this intense sensory ratification really leaves you to wonder about the nature of commitment itself, doesn't it? The Israelites used Israel's 12 pillars of law to physically anchor their identity. They used the visceral throwing of blood, and they witnessed a devouring fire to cement their vows. It makes you think, how do our own modern contracts, our digital signatures and quick-spoken vows, compare to the sheer weight of these ancient stones and fires? What physical anchors do we rely on today to truly guarantee our most sacred agreements? Something to think about as you reflect on this extraordinary ancient text. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep seeking to understand the foundations of the world around us.